it's worth travelling all this way for one hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. And companions like Imam Bukhari, or not companions, like great Imams like Imam Bukhari would travel vast lands to take one hadith of the Prophet ﷺ from different individuals. So we have no excuse in our day and age, whether it's an hour, 4 hours, 5 hours, that we can attend and be in gatherings of knowledge. These are the hilikat al-dhikr, as the Prophet ﷺ informed us about, the Riyad al-Jannah, the meadows of paradise, the hilikat al-ilm, from them are the gatherings of knowledge. And all of you, mashallah, the angels, they lower their wings for the student of knowledge. MashaAllah ta'ala, all of you, mashallah. And likewise, they seek forgiveness for you, as do the fish in the sea. Like, we see fish going, and they're saying, astaghfirullah, 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 for you by name. And so the Imams mentioned, likewise, even after a student has died, they keep on seeking forgiveness for that student, even after he's gone on. And there's nothing more noble after the Quran that we gather for the speech of the Prophet ﷺ, to hear that which emanates on his tongue. And it's beautiful in time that we hear the tongue of the recitation of our hadith. We realize that these are the exact words that our Prophet ﷺ uttered, and that's what the tongue is honored by. And so we've moved, inshallah, as you move through the text on hadith number 22. These are some notes that from a previous course that I taught on the Arba'een and Nawawī, and so it's entitled Pathway to Paradise. What's important, what I like to do at the beginning of every single hadith, is I like to speak about those companions who surrounded the Prophet ﷺ. The narrators. It's not just that we narrate a name, like you hear Sayyidina Anas ibn Malik, yet you don't know anything about Anas ibn Malik. Or you hear Amr ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, you don't know nothing about Amr ibn Khattab. Or you hear Abu Huraira, and you don't know nothing about Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu. And then likewise also the likes of the great Imam we're going to mention today, Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari radiallahu anhu, from the great companions of the Prophet ﷺ. Jabir ibn Abdullah, like, he's 7 years old when the Prophet enters Medina Munawwara. His father is called Abdullah. Abdullah, his father, is the one who he attended the Battle of Uhud. And likewise also he took the bay'ah with the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet entering him into Medina Munawwara, he takes his son Jabir with him to the Prophet ﷺ. Jabir, as they mentioned, he's only a young boy at that time. And so what he does, that he takes his bay'ah with the Prophet with his father. He's only a young boy at that age. But his father, mashallah, is that now his father is witnesses Badr. They say Jabir, he doesn't attend Badr. But some say he did. He attended and he was there distributing water at the Battle of Badr. But the night before the Battle of Uhud, his father, radiallahu anhu, he calls his son Jabir. And he says, Ya Jabir, he says, you have 9 sisters. He says, you're responsible for them after I die. He says, I have debts, these are my debts. You need to make sure you cover these debts. He says, and finally, you're in servitude to the Prophet ﷺ. Your life is spent serving him ﷺ. They're the 3 things I put down. He says, my father said, I've been beseeching Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I become the first of the believers to die at Uhud. The first of the believers to die at the Battle of Uhud. Abdullah al-Ansari, al-Khazraji, al-Ansari radiallahu anhu. And so as it transpires, his dua is accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That on the Battle of Uhud, he's the first companion of the Prophet to be killed. Out of those 70 companions that we killed, that Abdullah al-Khazraji radiallahu anhu, he's the first companion. Now the responsibility is left to his son Jabir. And Jabir radiallahu anhu, he's from those companions that now he comes and he complains to the Prophet ﷺ. He says, Ya Rasulullah, my father, he left us with debts. And likewise also I have sisters that they have a need. There are 9 sisters I've got to look after. And I'm this young boy. And all my father's left me. He says, the time for harvesting the dates. We have the dates, that's all I've got left. And the Prophet himself, he stands up. And he walks up the compound where the dates are. And he's walking around the compound dates and he sits on the date compound. And he says, tell all the debtors to come and take what they need. Tell all the debtors to come and take what they need. So they come, they take. They take him to pay off all the debts of what? His father, radiallahu anhu. He's fulfilling the rights of his father, even after death. And then likewise also, he says, now sell whatever remains for the sake of your sisters. Fulfill the rights of your sisters. Sayyidina Jabir, radiallahu anhu, he says, when I turned around, he said, it's as if not a single date had been taken by anyone. That the barakah, the Rasul, that they took, but it's as if nothing diminished. And this is the great companion in the Khandaq. We'll just make mention because we should. It brings our hearts alive and it makes us love them even more. He's the one who turns around to the Prophet in the Khandaq and he says, Ya Rasulullah, I invite you for dinner. And the Prophet says, can I bring 1 or 2 people with me? And he says, Naam. And so Jabir, he runs home. He says to his wife, he says, prepare food, the Prophet is coming. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, Khandaq. So then he goes back to the Prophet and he said, the food is being prepared. He says, I'm inviting the army with us. And Jabir said, and then he says, tell your wife to knead the dough, but don't make anything until I get there. Don't make anything until I get there. So Jabir runs home and he's like, well, what have you got? And she says, we just got some meat. And he said, the Prophet is bringing everyone with him. We have nothing to give them. He said, just knead the dough and wait. Just knead the dough and wait. And so she kneaded the dough, radiallahu anha. And the Prophet, he enters. And then he says, bring the food, bring the dish. And then he brings the dish in front of them. And the Prophet places his finger in the dish. And he says to them, come and eat. The Prophet goes into the cooking area and he kneads the dough by himself. And he says to his wife, now tell your wife to make the bread. And so Jabir said, I'm looking at the food. It goes down. People are full. They leave. I look again. The food replenished once again, filled back up again. Bread coming one after another, one after another, one after another. To the end now, the Prophet after every single companion is being fed. Because you think, okay, now the Rasul going to eat, he turns around, he says, have you and your wife fed? He said, no. The Prophet says, tell your wife to come and eat. You, both of you, come and eat. And the Rasul says, always the last. Always the last to eat, that he sees that what? Mu'jiza, the Prophet, how he feeds the whole of the army of the Khandaq, right there in his own house, with that which is small. And anything that the Prophet touches has barakah within it. Likewise, he touched Jabir, radiallahu anhu. And that companion, as we know, he goes to be from the great Imams of a hadith. He narrates from the Prophet 1,450 hadith. Like from those great companions that narrate a hadith, like Sayyidina Anas radiallahu anhu and Abu Huraira, that he narrates over 1,000 hadith from the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That great companion and his father radiallahu anhuma, that he mentions that a man comes, as we heard in the hadith, and questioned the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, do you think that if I perform the obligatory prayers, fast in the month of Ramadan, treat as lawful that which is halal, and treat as forbidden that which is haram, and do not increase upon that involuntary good deeds, then shall I enter paradise? And many of the Imams mention about this particular hadith here. The Sahabi who's asking this question right now is a great companion. His name here is known as Nu'man ibn Qa'qal al-Khaza'i radiyallahu anhu. He's what? He's a Badrite. He's from those who fought at Badr. Unless we forget, the people of Badr right there, the Prophet mentioned that Allah says, let them do whatever they want because they've been forgiven. The ones who stood, 313 that stand with the Prophet ﷺ in the second year of the migration. Many of us, we struggle with fasting, but can you imagine you never fasted in your life? And you never fasted ever. And now you've been told to fast the month of Ramadan. And now it's the first time you're going to fast, but now you're told to go to war. Oh, you're going to war, but you don't have any you don't have any weapons. They're like 9 swords between them. They had 2 horses, 70 camels. They're going to fight. But man sama Ramadan imanan wa ihtisaban ghufira ma taqaddama min dhanbihi. As the Prophet mentioned in the hadith, whoever fasts the month of Ramadan imanan wa ihtisaban, anticipating the reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah forgives all their previous sins. And another hadith, what has gone previous and what will come. Who stood there with Imanan in the month of Ramadan? Those 313 companions at Badr. That they stand there with pure faith in the Prophet ﷺ. After the great battle, as we know, Allah grants him victory. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the angel Jibreel comes to the Prophet ﷺ, says, see those 313 that stood with you right there? They are the greatest of the people on the face of the earth right now. The best of people on the face of the earth. And see those angels that descended? They're the khair ahl sama, the best of the angels of the heavens that came and defended the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam in that battle. The Badrites, as Allah says, let the people of Badr do whatever they want because they've been forgiven. They have literally free license to do whatever they want. In the time of the Caliph of Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab, when a person would come into the court of Umar, the first thing he would say, is he a Badrite? Did he attend Badr? If he did, let him go. Allah what? Exonerated them. Khalas. They have no sin. They can do whatever they want. But yet, the humility of the companions, like we get up for tahajjud and we feel, yeah man, I'm guaranteed paradise. We fast Ramadan and we feel, yeah, we done Hajj and Umrah, we feel good in it. Companions are not like that. They were guaranteed paradise by Allah. Some of them guaranteed paradise by the tongue of the Prophet ﷺ, and he only increased them in works with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The likes of Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu anhu, he's been guaranteed paradise on the tongue of the Prophet ﷺ. And yet the Prophet ﷺ, he says, I fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if one of my feet were in Jannah, I fear the punishment of Allah until both my feet are in Jannah. Khalas. I fear that Allah can still strip it from me. Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab guaranteed paradise on the tongue of the Prophet ﷺ. And he turns around for Allah to fulfill his promise that he will fill hellfire with people. He only has to put one person in there. And Sayyidina Umar says, I have yaqeen that I am that individual. I have certainty that I am that individual. Just increases them in humility. The people of Badr didn't just turn around and say, you know, khalas, that's it, game over. Let's go back. Just chill, watch Netflix. We're good, we can chill out now. They still strive for more. Yet they still ask these important questions. Ya Rasulullah, if I was just to do the bare minimum, like many of us, that's what we want from religion. We just want to do bare minimum with a great reward. We don't really want to strive paradise, but here, Jazakallah khair to the companion. Ya Rasulullah, because he's asking about paradise. If I did the bare minimum, and he's a Badrite, and he's eventually martyred at Uhud, can I be entered into paradise? And the Hadith of Prophet says yes. And we're going to come on to that because there's different narrations. Other companions ask the same question. And so this Hadith, in many of the books of the commentary on the Hadith, they mention the pathway to paradise. Like the pathway to paradise, at the very, very bare minimum, is fulfilling the commandments of God and staying away from his prohibitions. Religion easy. Sometimes we make it difficult upon ourselves. That's a very bare minimum right there. Like no one, as Ibn Ata'il al-Iskandari, he mentions, he says, my deeds, he says, I don't depend on them, but I need them. Like my deeds, I don't depend on them, but I need them. Why? Well, it's not because of your deeds that you enter paradise. As the Prophet mentioned, you enter paradise due to the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But now being raised in degrees in paradise, the likes of Imam al-Haddad, he mentions that the levels in paradise are tantamount to the verses of the Quran. Over 6,600 odd verses of the Quran. That your level in paradise, what you need to raise in paradise, deeds. You need good deeds. Yeah? And so here he mentions what we understand and we take from this hadith, the mercy of the Prophet ﷺ towards his ummah. That if a person fulfills those obligations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they're not a lot. Like the Prophet told us that religion is easy. Make it easy for people, don't make it difficult for people. Allah's not asking a lot from us. You know, the kids in the madrasa, we speak to them about prayer. Some people in terms of prayer, they find prayer difficult. I say, how long does it take you to do a prayer? Maybe 3 minutes if you do your fard. Okay, 3 minutes. You've got 5 prayers to do. Maybe maximum half an hour to do all your 5 daily prayers if you just did the fard. Yeah, that's all it is, yeah. You have 24 hours in a day. You try and say half an hour. You can't give half an hour to prayer. You can't give half an hour throughout the day to do prayer. Just if you just did your fard. And what the Imams mention is that everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has legislated for the believer, that's Allah's love for you and I. That's the divine's love for you and I. But the proof that we love Allah, we go beyond the obligatory. See, there's a difference when a person has to fast Ramadan because it's legislated and they must fast Ramadan. They fulfill the conditions of fasting. But to go beyond, taqarrab ila Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to go beyond and draw closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is when the slave moves from the obligatory to doing that which is voluntary or that which is sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And so here, desiring for paradise, the companion, he's desiring paradise, yeah, and seeking the pathway to it. And okay, he's been guaranteed paradise anyway, but he's just asking, it's as if he's asking on behalf of the ummah that's going to come after. He's asking on behalf of us later on. And so here the hadith mentions adhering to the obligations and leaving the prohibitions are the foundation of all success. And that's what they define taqwa as. At the bare minimum of taqwa is that you perform that which you are ordered to be performed, told to do, and you leave that which Allah has told you to leave. Like your intellect doesn't come into play here. It's not what I think. No, Allah ordered it. Like people will say, for example, like Ramadan, why do you fast Ramadan? And you hear all the answers in it. We feel what the poor feel, mashallah, which is right. You know what I mean? It's, you know what I mean? It's like intermittent fasting. That's a new one, isn't it? Like, it's a chance for your body to detox. All these things. Naam, you're right. But why do you fast for? Because we're ordered to fast. Like, we understand the relationship that we are slaves and we have a Lord. And He's ordered us to establish prayer, so we establish the prayer. Intellect doesn't come into it. I was having this conversation yesterday with some of the brothers. So part of the problem nowadays in many of the university settings is people are trying to put their intellect above revelation. Or people are trying to take in their revelation and conform it to their intellect. Like Sayyidina Ali Karamallahu Wajhahu, he said if it was based on our intellects, then we would wipe the bottom of our khuffain. We'd wipe the bottom, because your intellect will tell when you walk on that, so guess what? Wipe the bottom. He says, but we wipe the top. Why? Nabuwa. This is prophecy. This is from the Prophet ﷺ. Meaning that when Allah and His Messenger speak, intellects aside. Allah is speaking, so a person can say, well, you know what? 5 daily prayers, why can't I pray 6? 6 fard prayer, that's better for me. Do you know what I mean? Why 2.5% zakat? I can give 4, 5, 10%. It's better for me. Your intellect doesn't matter at that point. Allah's already prescribed what He's prescribed, but He's giving you the option to go beyond that. Yeah? Go beyond that in terms of nafil, in terms of sadaqah. Okay? And the religion has been made easy. As the Prophet said, make religion easy, don't make it difficult for people. We had a class before this class, and we were speaking of how in the Meccan period, like the Prophet said, He's not calling to prayer. He's not calling to fasting. He's not calling to Hajj, and He's not calling to Zakah. What's He calling to? Tawheed, Billah. Believe in Allah and believe in His Messenger. That's all He's calling to. For 10 years He's calling to that. I mean, like many people now, as soon as they become Muslim, prayer, fasting, you got to do all this. Like we had one brother that came, and he was like, his son became Muslim, Allah bless him. He was Shaykh Faz, Allah bless Shaykh Faz in abundance. So he drove up for that. That's something that I'll never forget. That was in Yemen. And we heard about our dear brother. He became Muslim, and he had a brain tumour. And he was getting better, and then it came back again. And we were in Yemen, and he said, "Look, he's on the verge of passing away." And so one of the brothers, everyone's skint in Yemen, right? You're broke in Yemen, and then so he's like, some brother phones up, said, "I think you should come back." And I was like, "No, mashallah, Shaykh Ibrahim said Shaykh Fat is just going on the phone. He's going to drive up. Look, shit, that Habib Umar was so happy when he heard that." I'm telling you, like, one of the teachers around, he's so happy. Why? He said, because like, Shaykh Faiz, he doesn't even know the brother's name. Doesn't know him, but just La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah brotherhood, they have rights, we go fulfill their rights. And so anyway, this brother, Allah yarhamahu, we eventually got back to Liverpool, we saw him, and he passed away. And then his father would phone me for the few nights, and he says, he said, I can't become Muslim. And I said, why? He said, because I love to have a bevy every night, I love to drink every single night. I have a drink every single night. And I said, look, put that aside for the moment. This is my belief. Like, do you believe? Khalas. And then he eventually takes a shahada over the grave of his son. He takes the shahada over the grave of his son. Why? That secondary. And I said to him, look, this takes time. These type of things take time. Don't worry. Within 2 years after becoming Muslim, he's teetotal. And that's someone who's an addict. And if you look at the prohibition of alcohol, it's one of the last things to be prohibited. One of the last things to be prohibited entirely. It's one of the last things. It's over this period of 20 odd, or 13 odd years. Prayer now comes, or 13 plus years. Prayer comes in the first revelation. Don't come to the prayer intoxicated. Then after years, in it is good for you, but there's harm in it. The harm is greater. Then finally the prohibition comes. And Allah knows that people need time to change. Like, religion is easy. Don't make things difficult for people. Make things difficult for yourself. And that's a real teacher. They'll make things difficult. They'll take the harder opinions for themselves. But why do the likes of the teachers in your community, they learn and they take so much? Why? So they can look for an opinion which is easy for people. You making excuses for people, making things easy for people in terms of the religion. But you take the harder opinions upon yourself. And so here this also shows us the sincerity of a Muslim, of this companion, and also the frankness of the companion, that they're not afraid to ask questions to the Prophet ﷺ. Unless some of the ulama say that this can be specific to this companion, but it can also be general as well. Because why? There's another narration where the Prophet ﷺ mentions, and this is like, he puts a condition to it. A man comes and asks the same question, Ya Rasulullah, if I just did all my obligatory acts, can I enter paradise? And the Prophet said, Nam, in sadaqta. That different. The Prophet says to the companion, yes, if you're truthful. If you're truthful. And here, sincerity in an act, it can't come overnight. And it can't come, like many of us, we worship Allah out of fear. That's the vast majority of believers. Many people worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala out of fear. Or they do an act just to get it out the way. They just do an act to get it out the way. I want to pray Dhuhr. Why? Dhuhr is in. Why? I've got to pray. Okay, you pray. It's as if you're praying just to get it out the way. Most people do out of fear. Few do it out of hope. Like, many people don't sit there. You think about many of the conversations you have. Many people don't pray out of, oh, mashallah, I have hope Allah's going to accept this prayer. I have hope that Allah is going to forgive me and admit me into paradise. Very few think like that. I mean, one of the brothers said, for the past 30 years I've been going to the mosque, and all I've been hearing about is hellfire for 30 years. You're going to hell, you're going to hell. He goes, where's the love? Where's the mercy? Because the Prophet said there's a mercy to all mankind. And then, but there's other people, they worship out of love of God. Like Rabi al-Adawiyya, the great saint, that she turned around and she says, Ya Allah, if you look at her rank with Allah, if you place me in paradise or you place me in hellfire, I don't care one iota, as long as you are happy with me. As long as you are content with me, that's all I care about. And that love, but loving of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a love and adherence to the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. You can't divorce the two. And that's why in the Quran Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَشَدُّ حُبًّا لِلَّهِ. They have an intense love for God, meaning they have an intense love for the Messenger of God. Now, we had this class with Shaykh Ibrahim on Friday, and alluding to this in a sense, it's a very informal class and brothers gathering, and one thing Shaykh Ibrahim, like, sometimes there's always pearls that fall from him, mashallah, but he made a statement which I thought, subhanallah. He said, many of us as like Muslims will live our lives, and people will look and say, okay, that's a Muslim. Maybe something they look at us and they might think, is he a Muslim? Is he not a Muslim? Due to the way they dress, the way they act. He said, far greater than that, what we want people to do is look at us and say, Muhammad. I see Muhammad in those individuals. I see a Muhammadan characteristics. I see a Muhammadan type of person there. I see a Muhammadan type of prayer. Like when you look, for example, our entire religion, it is the Prophet ﷺ. Don't think it's our prayer that's going to get us to paradise. And don't think it's our prayer that's going to make us raise in paradise. Our entire religion, as you know, is predicated on ittiba' and Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, on following the Prophet. Look, we are as human beings hardwired to follow. We as humans are hardwired to follow. Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will mention in the Quran, لَن تَرْضَ عَنْكَ الْيَهُودَ وَلَن نَصَارَ حَتَّى تَتَّبِعَ مِلَّتَهُم. God said the Jews and Christians, people of disbelief, they're never going to be content with you until you have the volition, you follow their millah, their way. You follow their way. Allah mentions another ayah, qualification of love. In tuhibbun Allah, if you love God, you say you love God, Allah wants the proof in the pudding. What is it? فَاتَّبِعُونِي يُحْبِبُكُمْ Allah. Follow me, God will love you. And He will forgive you your sins. Meaning follow Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that our prayer, as the Prophet said, pray as you see me pray. Our prayer predicated on following him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Like, tell me where in the Quran it says make ruku and recite the Fatiha in the surah, make ruku, come out, make sujood, pray 2 rak'ah for Fajr and 4 rak'ah for Dhuhr and 4 rak'ah. Where does it tell you that in the Quran? It doesn't tell you any of that in the Quran. The greatest tafsir of the Quran is the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allah tells you fast the month of Ramadan. He doesn't tell you how to fast, but the Prophet shows you how to fast. Our fasting imitates his fast. Umrah, Hajj, Allah says perform Hajj if you're able to do. Where do all the pillars? How do we know how to make tawaf? How do we know to go to Muzdalifah, Arafah? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Zakah, Allah says establish the prayer and pay zakah. Now who gives us the mizan, the scales of zakah? The Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So us following him sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that is the gateway to paradise. That is the way to the Prophet. And the greatest adherence you have to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the greatest acceptance that you will have from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, those people Yawm al-Qiyamah, they're 10 out of 10 with Allah and they're gone. They cross across that sirat in the blink of an eye. Those who spent their lives endeavouring to follow the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We can't be him, but we imitate. وَمَن تَشَبَّهَ بِالْقَوْمِ فَهُوَ مِنْهُمْ. Whoever imitates the people, they're from those people. And so here, zakah and hajj, 2 conditional pillars. And the reason why he doesn't mention here, for example, he doesn't mention here about zakah, and he doesn't mention here, for example, about fasting, is because they're going to mention, they're going to mention here about fasting, about zakah, and hajj, because they hadn't been revealed yet. That's why the companion doesn't mention. The only thing he asks about is prayer. If I perform the prayer, and obviously fasting has now come in because he was a Badarite. So here, zakah hasn't been revealed yet. And also likewise, hajj has not been legislated yet. So he said, and I stay away from the haram, that which you prohibited. And the Prophet says, no, he told different companions different things. Like when the women came to take bay'ah with him, he said, you know, protect your houses, protect your chastity, etc. He told them certain things that they had to stay away from. So here, that's why zakah and hajj is not mentioned. And the importance of prayer and fasting. The importance of these 2 pillars. And then we mentioned, and you've studied in the hadith here, you know, the pillars of Islam. Bunya Islam. Islam is built on what? These pillars. And they're going to say the central pillar right there, which holds up the entire edifice. Because when we think of pillars, what do we think of? What image comes into your heart, mind when you think of a pillar? Strength. Right. What type of building comes into your mind? A palace. Good. At least he said, mashallah, alhamdulillah, a palace. So in the time of the Prophet, there are no palaces in Medina. So what is the pillar that they're speaking about from the hadith? It's a tent. Tent has pillars, pegs in it. And the pillar here, the central pillar here, they're going to mention is the prayer. Keeps up the whole edifice, meaning that when a person loses their prayer, the entire edifice is shaky. Khalas. All the other pillars are going to follow. They're going to fall, very easily fall. And that's why the Prophet, his last words in public, as-salah, as-salah. The prayer, the prayer. And the only thing he's concerned about, even in the pangs of death, Abu Bakr leading the prayer. I want to lead the prayer, the prayer. You find the Prophet in his entire life, anytime issues, even with his wives, when you do your head in, you just walk, shut the door, go into prayer. Any issues he's got, you find the Rasul in prayer. And that's why the Prophet mentioned the difference between us and the disbelievers, as-salah. You know, the great Ahmad ibn Hanbal, he was asked about prayer. He said, what is your ruling on a person who leaves prayer, doesn't pray, and dies in that state? Question to Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, he says, my ruling is the same as Umar ibn Khattab, is the same as Abdullah ibn Umar, is the same as Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, the kibar of the companions, the same as Mu'adh ibn Jabal. Look, he's reciting companions. He said, well, what was their ruling? He says a person in his life has the capacity to pray, doesn't pray, and they die in that state. And this is Ahmad ibn Hanbal. He says, what the ruling you give on that person when he dies? He says, you take him, what he says? He says, you wrap him in a shroud and you go bury him in the cemetery of the non-Muslims. That's the ruling of, that's the hukm of what? Ahmad ibn Hanbal. Why? Because the Prophet mentioned the difference between a believer and a disbeliever is the prayer, is the prayer, is the prayer. Hakada. I mean, obviously other Imams are going to differ on that, but that shows you, look at Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. Now, the severity of the prayer. Like, severe on what? Missing the prayer altogether, or leaving the prayer out of choice. You know, our teacher, Shaykh Umar al-Khatib, when he first came, Shaykh is his teacher there, when he first came to England, first time he'd ever stepped out of Yemen to the Western Hemisphere. And so when he comes now to England, and so one of the translators, he's there, and so there's questions at the end of one of his talks, and then someone turns around and says, like, you know, what advice you give to someone someone in their house is not praying, or their spouse is not praying, what advice you give to them? And Shaykh Umar, in his purity, turned around to the translator, and I remember he turned around and he says, what do you mean a Muslim doesn't pray? And we were like, oh my God, that's just the tip of the iceberg. But like, to him, he couldn't fathom that a Muslim doesn't pray. Like, maybe like in Tarim at that time, like, you know what I mean, as someone who's like classed as a bad person is someone who doesn't pray in the masjid. But he couldn't fathom that a Muslim did not pray. That's what you mean a Muslim doesn't pray. That's that edifice right there, that pillar right there. When prayer goes, then you find everything else as well is shaky in terms of religion. But the command is saying here, showing us the importance of prayer and fasting. Prayer and fasting, okay? The organisation of worship, yeah? That we organise our ibadah, meaning we fulfill our priorities in religion. And priorities are fara'id, ensuring that the fara'id are fulfilled. And no doubt, you study with the likes of Shaykh Faiz and others, like in the Shafi'i school, they're going to say, you can't even pray a sunnah until you've made your qadar up. Hanafi is going to differ on that, but they're going to say, for example, you can't even pray a sunnah or nafil until your qadar. Why? Priorities. Priorities is that, you know what I mean? And the beautiful thing, subhanAllah, you know, someone asked Habib Umar one time after Ramadan, you know, the 6 days of Shawwal that come in, that the Prophet mentioned, whoever fasts the 6 days after Ramadan, they have the reward of fasting a dahr. A dahr is not a year, a dahr is all time. From the beginning of time till the end of time, as if you fasted the entirety of it by fasting 6 days of Shawwal. And so people ask Habib, some people have got qadar to make up. They've got to make qadar, do they miss out on the reward? And Habib Umar's response was so beautiful. He says, do you think you've got a stingy Lord? Do you think he's not going to accept your fasting and your niyat? Do you think he's the one who returned you back to it, and you think he's not going to reward you for? And what makes you think you're not going to be rewarded for making that up? Like, you know what I mean? As Ibn Abbas said, perhaps the one who sins and is repentant over that sin is more beloved to Allah than a person who does a good deed and is proud of that good deed. Heck, then we don't know. Don't forget, like, paradise is, the road to paradise is paved with sinners. Paved with sinners. And no doubt in that, okay? And so performing obligations and leaving prohibitions is a protection from hellfire. Yeah. It's a protection from what? From hellfire. Every time we leave a prohibition. And the beautiful thing is the hadith that mentions about sins, about raqib and atid. The hadith that mentions that when a person performs a good deed, an obligatory act, he's rewarded, and Allah always rewards you 10 times plus regarding your good deeds that you do with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And even if you intend it, but you cannot fulfill it, because there's people here nowadays, like, that you reach an age where perhaps there's people, like, maybe, you know, they've got, you know, medical issues that they can't fast no more. Yeah, they've got medical issues. Allah still rewards you for that. If you spent your life fasting and now you come to an age where you can no longer fast, Allah reward you for that fast. I don't think He doesn't reward you. I mean, perhaps a person prayed, for example, and now they're in a coma, now they're in a car crash, now they're unconscious. Allah reward them for them prayers. Because if they would have been able, He would have what? The angels write down as if they're doing it as long as they're alive. Angels write it down. And say, for example, you wanted to go and do it and something stopped you from doing it. You wanted to go to the masjid and now you can't get to the masjid. Something came up. You have the angels write down as if you did that act. Right? Our Lord is not bakhil. He's not stingy with us. Like they mentioned that our Imams will mention that a person, for example, you think, oh, I want to memorize the Quran, and you begin, and then you die in that endeavor, or you come to class. You come to class and you want to seek knowledge and you want to be from all those lofty intentions, and you die in that endeavor. Yawm al-Qiyamah, you are raised with the hufadh of Quran. It's as if you memorize the entire Quran. You're raised with amongst the ulama. You intercede for people. You reach what you wanted to reach with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah looks at your intentions. But here now, what about a bad deed? What about that which is prohibited? No. And it mentions a hadith that when the slave goes to do a bad deed, if he doesn't do it, he's rewarded as a good deed. It's written as a good deed for him. He left an act of what? Disobedience. But now say that he does the bad deed. You do that thing which is prohibited. You do that thing which is wrong. The hadith mentions the angels wait. And some say 3 days. What for? Tawbah. Is he or she going to make Tawbah? And if they don't make it, it's written as one sin. One evil deed, one wrong deed, yeah? But then it's always open to erasure, isn't it? You know what I mean? By making Tawbah for those sins. I mean, if people want to look at like Ribat al-Qushayriya, anyone read that book, Ribat al-Qushayriya, that you look at that book, is split into 2 parts. The first half of that book is people who reach the highest ranks of sainthood, and they were all sinners in the beginning. They all made Tawbah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so even when, look at that, you perform a good deed, you do which is an obligation, you're rewarded. You perform a prohibited act. What does it need? Tawbah. And Tawbah has conditions. And from them, remorse. From them, likewise, also making a strong intention never to go back to that sin again. Leaving those things that lead to that sin. Leaving it all out the way. And making a firm resolve with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then what? Khalas. You know when sometimes you can remember your sins? That's not a bad thing. That's keeping you humble with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We all have a past, we all have a history. But that keeping you humble with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, don't go ahead of yourself. That you think you're this, that, but don't forget what you used to do. And that's the age we live in. How can people now look down upon people who are sinning when they themselves were in that situation 10, 15 years ago? Many of us, 20, 30 years ago, not the same people in this room right now. Definitely not. Do you know what I mean? But through the fadl of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then why would we want that for other people? Yeah, we want to be, you know what I mean, judge, jury, and executioner over other people. That's the affair of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not our affair. But when you see prohibitions, when you see someone doing something which is haram or wrong, you hate the act, but you don't hate the individual. Because the essence of everyone is good. They can be guided towards good, but we hate those acts that they performed on their hand. Why? Because it's hated to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's hated to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So here, obligations and prohibitions, are given only by Allah. And then performing obligations, leaving prohibitions is a protection from hellfire. Performing supererogatory actions draws ones closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, and that's when the hadith, the Prophet mentions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that there's nothing, a slave draws closer to me with nothing more than the fara'id, those things which are obligations. Yeah? He says, but then he keeps on drawing closer to me through supererogatory acts until I become the eye which he looks with, the ear with which he hears with, the tongue which he speaks with, the feet which he walks with, the hand, meaning what? They're the ones that the Prophet said, khayran nas, the best of people, that when you see them, God is remembered. Like there's certain people that you walk in their presence, you go into the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala straight away. Your tongue starts moving in the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're the ones that were Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has impacted. And we should never forget that. That's from the time of the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Like when a man walks in Sayyidina Ali, in the caliph of Sayyidina Ali, he walks in to pray and Sayyidina Ali says, go back and perform your wudu properly. You ain't performed wudu properly. He turns around, he says, Al-Wahi yunzil, revelation that comes. Sayyidina Ali says, no. He says, beware of the spiritual gaze of the believer. Beware of the firasat al-mu'min, the spiritual gaze of the believer. Why? Because he looks with the light of God. I mean, don't think that everyone's eye is the same. Like there's people we can tell you they've never sinned with their eyes in their entire life. Their eyes aren't like our eyes. There's people who have never heard sin in their life, never heard wrong in their life. Don't think their ears are like our ears. Or never done haram with their hands in their life. You mean, or any of the organs that they've got from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, limbs they've got from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't think we're all the same, we're not the same. Just like when you pray. You know, we say it's prayer time, we're all going to pray together. We all pray together, but the reward is very different for every person. As Habib Umar, Hafidhullah Ta'ala mentioned, that if the veil of the unseen was lifted, two people physically standing next to each other, the reward is different to like the heavens and the earth. In terms of reward. Why? The intention of one person, the sincerity of one person, the presence of one person, all different, yani. All different. The humility of a person within prayer, different. Don't think we're all the same. We all do the same acts, but the reward is very, very different for what? For different individuals. And don't forget the companions of the Prophet, no one can match their acts. The Sahaba, no one can match that. Like you have foolish people saying, like they mentioned towards the end time, the latter generations will curse the first generations. Their men were men. You think you like Abu Bakr? You think your act's like Abu Bakr? Now there's a great Imam called Mustafa al-Aidarus, and he mentions, he says, towards the end of times, we don't know even if a single one of our acts will be accepted. And we don't know, like the Ramadan, we went fasted last year, we don't know if that accepted. There's no signs of acceptance. The Umrahs that we all go, we don't know if they're accepted. The Zakat that we pay, we don't know if they're accepted. And he said towards the end of times, he says, Allahu A'lam, if the fara'id will be accepted. He said, but there's one thing which is always guaranteed accepted by Allah, with no preconditions. That's Salat al-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Prayers on the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Why? Allah puts no precondition to that. No precondition. The saint, the sinner, anyone. Salawat al-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And through that salawat and the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, by virtue of that, Allah accepts deeds. That's why dua is praising Allah, prayers upon the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Middle of dua, prayers upon the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. End of dua, prayers upon the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. As what? More of a chance of acceptance by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when you mention the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam within that. Okay? Obligations and prohibitions are only given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, yeah? Which are mentioned in the Quran and also like the Sahih transmissions as well. And so here, again, we mention a sign that Allah loves you, He gives you the fara'id to do. But the sign that you want God, you go beyond that. And I'm telling you now, 90%, maybe 95% of Muslims, if prayer was not obligatory, people wouldn't pray it. We look at the prayer, innit? Revealed on the Isra wal Mi'raj. It's revealed as 50 prayers to the Prophet ﷺ. And he goes to Musa. And Musa says, no, I'm telling you too much for your community. Nah, we only got, you know what I mean, a handful of prayers and that's too much for ours. You best go back Allah to lessen it. The Prophet goes back. Khalas. Allah reduces it by 5 every time, as we know. And they say one of the reasons why Musa keeps on asking the Prophet to go back, because every time he sees the Prophet, he sees a different type of majesty on the face of the Prophet come from the divine presence. Every time that he comes. He said, until it's brought down to 5. And then Musa said, I'm telling you, that's too much for your community. Go back and ask Allah to reveal it. And the Prophet said, nah, I'm shy. I'm fearful Allah is going to reduce it to nothing. For many of the Ummah, Sadaqa Musa. Musa spoke the truth. Why? Because many of the Ummah, this day can't pray 5 prayers a day. They affirm what Musa said, innit? It's too difficult for your Ummah. Why? Because you can't even perform 5 daily prayers throughout the day. Many of us, Sadaqa Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Prophet spoke the truth. No, 5 enough. And then look at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A herald calls out, Allah prescribed 50. Whoever prays 5 has the reward of 50. Whoever prays 5 has the reward of 50. For what? Just 5 obligatory prayers. I know when we think about it, we don't even know what one prayer is with Allah. We don't know what it means to be raised in 1 degree, 1 rank with Allah. We don't even know. You said you do 1 good deed, Allah gives you 10. We don't even know what that means. We don't even know what 1 is with Allah. And Allah is going to give us 10. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to give us 10. Going to reward us. No, and the beautiful thing is, look how generous Allah created you. He gave you the success to perform that prayer. He allowed that prayer to come on your hands, and then He is going to reward you for that prayer. The Quran says Allah created you and created that which you do. He knows. And how merciful is Allah. He allowed you, gave you the success. The thought of praying, the thought of going to make wudu, that all Allah. Placing that there for you. Khalas. And then what? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He rewards you for the acts which He created on your hands anyway, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, sorry, forgive me, I digress slightly. Just going very quickly, inshallah. And so this is the only hadith in which Imam Nawawī, rahimahullah ta'ala, explained the meaning of some of its words. Yeah, he felt it was paramount important to explain it is not talking about istihlal, making things which are haram to be halal. This is the only one that he mentioned, which is a right that only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's the only hadith that he comments on. And so he mentions here zakat and hajj were not mentioned because maybe they were not legislated at the time, or maybe because the companion that asked the question was so poor that it didn't apply to him. He knows he's not a person of zakat. He can't pay zakat. He's never going to be in that category of people who can. So perhaps they say that's the reason he doesn't ask about zakat. But he speaks about what? Prayer and likewise fasting. Okay? And so he says, Imam Nawawī, he did not put this hadith so that we adhere to the basics only. But from what he's trying to allude to is that we learn from the eagerness of the companion to attain Jannah. And he has been promised it because he's a Badrite. Let's not forget that. He's from the people of Badr. But he still wants to know, if I just did the minimum, can I still get into paradise? And it's the truthfulness of the companion in admitting his weakness. And some people like that. Some people, I'm telling you, some people, they're only going to be able to do the Friday. Like the brother I know, Allah bless him, he's one of the most beautiful brothers I know. He's in Liverpool. MashaAllah, Shaykh. He tells me, MashaAllah, he goes, I struggle with fasting. I'm going to be honest. I struggle with fasting. He goes, I can fast Ramadan. And you know what? He goes, the 6 days of Shawwal are more difficult than the whole of Ramadan. But we look at the reward, because the reward is as if you fast the whole of time. He says, but outside of that, I can't fast. I find it really difficult to fast. I find it's just really taxing on myself. I find it really difficult. I will try and fast Yom al-Arafah, etc. But Monday and Thursdays, I find difficult. I try, but I find it difficult. Alhamdulillah, if people are able to fast, alhamdulillah. You are able to, but you realize people have limitations in themselves as well. People have certain things that they find difficult. But Allah, when He gives difficulty in one place, He gives ease in another place. Like when Allah takes away something, He always replaces it with something as well. Like He'll give people the capacity. Like some people, I'm going to tell you now, they cannot sit in a class for an hour. They can't sit in a madrasa. They just can't. They can't do it. I mean, and they will try and attend, and they'll try and do courses and try and do whatever. Some people memorizing the Quran, they can't do it. They can't do it. And that's why we have to look to the companions, the Prophet, because not every single one of them was a hafiz of the Quran. Not every single one of them was reached a rank of being a mufti. I mean, not every single one of them had these attributes high attributes that we see, but they were all given something else as well. And you'll find, like, some of the companions, like the Prophet, like Nu'man there, the joker, makes the Prophet laugh. I mean, like, people find themselves in the companions of the Prophet. That's what the Prophet said, in my companions, they're like guiding stars. Whichever one that you take, you'll be guided. I mean, you'll find yourself in the companions. Some will find themselves as warriors. MashaAllah. I mean, others will find themselves as students. Others will find themselves in khidmah, in servitude. And don't think for one iota, mashallah, don't think the person who's at the front is any better than anyone else. Our teacher Habib Umar, we mentioned in a khidmah class yesterday, he would say, the people who serve the coffee in the Mawlid, they're people of paradise. Why? Because they have itqan. They've perfected that khidmah, servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, where the reward of the Arab Muslim all goes back to? He says, the people who work in the kitchens that you don't even know their names. He says, subhanAllah, one of those great examples that, because the basis of all these acts is sincerity. Like, who cares about creation? You just want to be known with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so the whole point is that we act not for the sake of creation, but we act that that we're truthful, inshallah, and that we try and be people of sincerity. And here, finally, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always encourages lofty aspirations. The Prophet ﷺ was guaranteed paradise, but still worshipped Allah. And so I mentioned in the commentary, like the Prophet, look at how he is. Like Sayyidina Aisha, she gives a beautiful transmission. She says one time, she says, look at the transmission, she goes, I'm lying with the Prophet in bed. The Prophet hold it up. I'm lying against the Prophet, like her back to the Prophet. And the Prophet, he says, the night of Aisha, and he whispers to her, Ya Aisha, he says, can I seek permission from you? Because it's your time, you're right. To stand in prayer with my Lord. And she says, Ya Rasulullah, she goes, there's nothing more beloved to me than you being next to me. Here's the key that she says, but my want is your want. And that's what Prophet said, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى هواه or حتى هواه تبعا ما جئت به. Now, none of you will completely believe until his desire conforms to what I came with. Conforms to what I came with. And then the Prophet stood in prayer. Khalas, he stood in prayer. And every night he stood in prayer. And Sayyidina Aisha, Ya Rasulullah, you stand, do you know how long you have to stand for your feet to swell? How many hours you have to stand in one place? As shopkeepers, like they can do a 10, 12 hours and their feet still not swollen. They can stand at the till there, maybe later on in age, but there you see you have to stand for a long time for your Ya Rasulullah, why are you doing this to yourself? When Allah's forgiven you, I mean you don't have any sins, but Allah's forgiven you previous mishaps or any future mishaps, and the prophets don't sin as we know. He said, أَفَلَا أَكُونَ عَبْدًا شَكُورًا, should I not be a grateful slave? Allah's honoured us with Islam. Should we not be grateful slaves? Should we not be grateful for our Prophet? Sometimes, you know, we're hardwired to follow, yet we desire to follow other than the Prophet. I mean, everyone, they have all these influences, all these politicians promising you, all these people, you know what I mean, want you to sign and be with them and follow them. Yet the one who didn't spent everything for the sake of this religion that we can say, La ilaha Muhammad Rasulullah today, we don't want to follow him. The one that the Prophet said the keys of paradise have been placed in my hands. We don't want to enter paradise with him. Or in the month that we're in now, his daughter Fatima Batul Zahra, anha, for the women, born in this blessed month right here. I mean, the Prophet said, "What Fatima is a piece of me. Whatever brings joy to, makes her happy, makes me happy. Whatever saddens her, saddens me." And our teacher Habib Amr says that on the Yom Al Qiyamah, you know, on the Sirat, when everyone's panicking, that the angels will call out, "Turn away." Tells all the angels, turn away. Why? Fatima and her party are crossing the Sirat. So how many want to be with that party? How many people want to be on that party with her over there? And then he makes a statement, whoever does not gaze upon the face of Fatima will not gaze upon the face of her father. Now you chose other than her as an example. And other than her as an influencer. Other than her as well, someone that you want to follow. And so religion is lofty aspirations. And we have to have himma. As the great Habib Muhammad al-Haddar, rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentioned, he said that the Ism al-A'zam, the supreme name of God, himma, aspiration for religion, inshallah ta'ala. And then we just finish, inshallah ta'ala, that it's incumbent upon a believer. Likewise, also what we take from it, it's incumbent upon a believer to ask the people of knowledge about the Lord of Islam. Don't worry about it, we're finished now, inshallah. Okay, so here the question, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, ask the people of knowledge if you do not know. The people of dhikr, the remembrance. And that has many, many different meanings. But here, the people of knowledge. That, as Imam Ghazali says, we do not do an act in religion until we know the ruling about that act. And this is, you know what I mean, it's hal, you have to look at your state. So for us, like in terms of what we're doing, fardain, belief, you know, prayer every single day. If Ramadan comes, you learn the rules behind Ramadan, before Ramadan. You know, Hajj comes, before you get married, learn the rules of marriage and divorce, etc. It means zakah you got to pay, learn the rules around that. Do you mean you're going to go into business, ask about the rulings around trade to ensure that the trade is sound and the profits are sound, etc. Yeah, it's halal and haram, and we do not have ignorance is not an excuse in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No one has an excuse to say I did not know, especially in this age when ulama can be accessed in our local communities and also all over the world. No one has an excuse to say they do not know in front of the Divine subhanahu wa ta'ala. And a teacher should be expansive for the learner and give them glad tidings and take them with ease, and also encourage them. So also with the students as well, as you mentioned, the teachers are the ones that to try and make things easy for the students and obviously more difficult upon themselves. And sallallahu alayhi wa sallam.